Okay, so we're jumping into chapter 2, but no, we're not dealing with all 22 verses. We all know that's not going to happen, but we're starting in part 1, which is the first 3 verses, which is just simple. There were and will be false teachers, but as we go through this after part 1, next week we'll try and get through a big dump of text, because at this point, starting in verse 1, he's going to start following Jude's outline. We've already talked about Jude, so it's just a lot of repeating stuff and discerning what is Peter's difference from Jude as opposed to here. So next week, past examples of judgment and salvation is on the docket, and that includes the celestial rebellions of Genesis 6 we've already talked about. And then part 3, verses 10b through 16, talking like using the example of Balaam. His basic point is you act like an animal, you get treated like an animal. And then finally, part 4, what do you mean, these people? Huh? And that will close us off, and it just circles back to where chapter 2 opens a little bit. So, as we get back into 2 Peter, we talk about his problem people. Let's review just slightly Jude's problem people and the differences between them, because they're not the same people. Jude's what I called antinomian apostates. They base their lives on their visionary experiences, their dreams, and they claim a certain prophetic status here. While in 2 Peter, they're just not the same group, which is why I call them heretical apostates, because they don't base anything on their dreams, but they are teaching false stuff. So they're both heretical in different ways for different reasons. Peter's group just don't claim any prophetic status to reinforce their false concepts. Now, that's important because Peter's going to call them false prophets, but they're not going to strictly claim prophetical status as best we can tell. But they do speak presumptuously about stuff they just clearly do not understand and just do not wish to understand. So they're going to be very quick to act in foolish ways against God, and they're going to cause terrible harm and terrible consequences to themselves. Now, if chapter 1 lays out the groundwork for what the heretical apostates were teaching, and Peter's point is to say, I don't want you to follow that, I want you to actually do this, and he's kind of emphasizing the positives. Hey, the homily is all the positive virtues you should be chasing after. The apostles weren't liars, we got it right, and we weren't deceiving you, and the prophets got it right. If you jumped ahead to chapter 3, he explicitly lays out who the heretical apostates were. And in chapter 2, he's just going to give a general description of what their character is like and what God is going to do about them. So this is going to take us all the way through chapter 2, and then we're going to get much more explicit detail of what these people are thinking in chapter 3. But I've been covering it, just essentially weaving it into everything, so it's not going to be a surprise when we get to chapter 3, and we'll move through chapter 3 fairly quickly, I hope. So the first 3 verses of 2 Peter 2 say this: but there were also false prophets among the people, just as there will be false prophets, false teachers among you. They will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the sovereign Lord who bought them, bringing swift destruction on themselves. Many will follow their depraved conduct and will bring the way of truth into disrepute. In their greed, these teachers will exploit you with fabricated stories. Their condemnation has long been hanging over them, and their destruction has not been sleeping. Big idea for that is that the heretical apostates are bad men who lead in the wrong direction, and they're going to be destroyed. That's the consequence of their actions. I give you this picture because I'm starting to see that I think these heretical apostates are basically like sleazy con men. If they're intentionally doing what they're doing out of greed, the way Peter says, there's a question that we want to deal with. Do they really intend on leading people astray, or are they just genuinely believing their own teachings? That's kind of an up for debate question. It could be that they're just genuinely believing that there's not going to be a return, there's not going to be judgment, and that their actions are okay. But they also might be sleazy con men who are intentionally doing this. So verses 1 through 3 at least lays out this question. I lean a little bit more towards the sleazy con man attitude, but I'm just saying I don't know that for sure. Okay, so verse 1, there were false prophets among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you. Only now in this letter is Peter actually defining the problem. The problem is these people, the heretical apostates. The wolf in sheep's clothing, the people who are faking it to make it. About this, Gene Green says, up to this moment, the author has laid the groundwork for his denunciation of their teaching and conduct and had apparently answered their charges against the apostolic and prophetic testimony, but not until 2:1 does he turn to name the opponents who were troubling the church. False teachers will probably be the title he's using for them, because false prophet seems to be reflecting on people in the past. So this again reinforces that in Jude, they're false prophets who think that they're fulfilling a prophetical ministry. Here in 2 Peter, his group of heretics do not claim that status. They're just teaching very, very bad things. So it makes sense to do this now because he's just finished defending the apostolic and prophetic testimonies to the Christian gospel. So he's now just going to turn to using the Old Testament prophetic ideas as a witness against the teachings of these heresies and strengthen the overall apostolic message of godly living contained in the opening homily. I mean, it's all flowing out in thought, one thing after another, of what he is and isn't doing here. So now that he's defended the prophets, chapter 2 is going to turn to Old Testament prophetic literature starting in verse 4. It is going to be typological, and we'll talk more about that, review it next week. But if you don't know what that is, now's the time to review that from the book of Jude. He says they were among the people, that is God's people, the people of Israel. He's reflecting on the past. Look at Jude 5. He uses the people to refer to Israel of the Exodus generation, destroyed in the desert. And that's not exactly the limitation Peter is placing on it, but he's including that there. So those past people are juxtaposed alongside among you, the current, present people of God, which is both Jew and Gentile in the church, the group that Peter is writing to. But regardless of the past group, the present group, false teachers, false prophets were among both groups. So he's employing the typological interpretation of ancient Israel to explain the reality of his audience present. And we'll cover more about this next week when we actually get into how he uses the Old Testament itself typologically. So no worries on that today.
So can I ask a question about the people, those people, whatever that first quote was, the people? It's not just those that were murmuring, but those that were actually teaching or preaching?
Yes, because Peter's idea is much more across time. Jude talks specifically about the Exodus generation and how they failed, how that is like the present grumblers. So Jude has two very specific people groups in mind. And while Peter is rebuking a very specific group in the churches, his past reflection is on like all throughout God's people's history, the people of Israel, there have always been this ongoing group. So and that shouldn't surprise us then that people like false teachers actually exist in current churches. So he's already called them false prophets. Really, I'm not sure that that's fair to say. He's mentioned that false prophets exist in the past. I don't know that that's the way that he is describing the present teachers, which is why he may be using false teachers. But it could also be that he's using both terms to actually build out a profile of what these men are like. They're false prophets in the sense that they're denying future prophetical ideas that the Old Testament contains. This is part of the parousia, the coming of Christ. This is part of it. So just by denying it, they're falsely propagating a future reality that the prophets themselves actually confirm. So in that sense, they are false prophets, but I think Peter's a little more emphatic on their teachings are bad. And I'm just mentioning that so that we don't confuse them with Jude's group or any other specific group. Regardless, they're not sent from God. Their teachings are fundamentally erroneous, and their ultimate rejection of the notion that Jesus has ultimate dominion over the world and can properly judge it is fundamentally false teachings that they're going about spouting. So the church is facing a crisis because men who claim some authority for their teachings are, in the evaluation of Peter, false. Peter, an apostle, so foundational to the ministry of the early church, and Peter is the leader of that movement. He is the top apostle. I mean, You can't get more emphatic than Peter telling you you're wrong of the leader of the Christian movement, other than Jesus coming back himself and telling you you're wrong, which is going to happen one day, and Peter is trying to make that point. Any questions on the identity of the false teachers and just who they are and are not? Okay, now he says there will be these false teachers amongst you. So the question is, are they coming in the future or have they already arrived? He's using the future tense here in these verses. He'll come up again in chapter 3. Because some people will interpret the book of 2 Peter, as we talked about, as not being written by Peter, but somebody claiming to write Peter's name and voice.
And what's that name?
What?
What's that word for that?
Pseudepigraphical.
That's
it. False writings. So somebody is, if you interpret it that way, somebody will say, well, he says will be because they're reflecting back like 2 or 3 centuries as if they're Peter, and they're talking about heresies that are now happening in the 2nd and 3rd century. Usually Gnostic heresies, because those were the prominent ones. But depending on what era or century you're in at the church will depend on what heresy people are talking about. I just want you to see that's not really necessary based on it. One, as we've obviously talked about, I think Peter is actually writing this letter. I do not think it is pseudepigraphical. And yet, throughout other verses in this same chapter, he describes them as if they've already arrived in the present tense. They are already feasting in the churches, seeking converts to their ways. They pervert Paul's teachings. They're ignoring fundamental Christian truth. So they are already doing these things. So is Peter looking at things prophetically, or is it a future person centuries later looking back at the past and getting their tenses mixed up? You can find that Peter does something very similar to Paul in 2 Timothy. This is not the only place Paul does this, but he vacillates between future and present tenses all the time. It was actually a very common form of writing in the 1st century. So if somebody says, well, because it's written in the future tense, it helps strengthen the idea that it's not actually Peter, it's somebody later writing, and he's putting it in a future tense to deal with things going on in their century and lifetimes. You don't need to go down that road at all. That's just silly. The most likely explanation is that the language is employed to help explain eschatological ideas. What I mean by that is this. The coming of the people in the last days, or the latter days, is a matter of Old Testament prophecy, largely typological. But Peter and other New Testament authors make it clear that they're currently living in those prophesied days. So they're using future tense because that's the way prophetic literature tends to work. But they're also using present tense because they're not just living in the reality of it happened in the past and they foretold this. It's happening in the present, and it was foretold that it was happening. That shouldn't surprise anybody. What's the big deal? But besides all of that, the Greek language is just more flexible than English tenses and Hebrew tenses. You can use past, present, and future interchangeably all the time in Greek. Word order doesn't matter in Greek, which makes it so maddening to me that word order is so unimportant in Greek. But it is that flexible of a language. And New Testament people were that flexible in their thinking. If it was written in the past about the future, we can keep the future tense as we describe the present reality. That's perfectly fine. Future, present realities are just far less strict. I mean, it does not need to be the reasons that you sometimes hear about. It's just such a simple notion if you understand the way thinking worked in the 1st century Jewish world.
Not to drop like a bomb and then scoop because I'm fired, but like in
I'm doing it anyway.
Verb tenses especially, English is very limiting, but like for example in French you have a tense that explains this thing is happening and will continue to happen. Is it possible he's doing something similar in the Greek and it's just a translation?
I will say the translation of this by the NIV is at least accurate in that he's moving between specifically future and present tense. If he wanted to say it's happening and it's going to go on happening, he's got the participle tense that he can do this. INGs It's happening, and it's going. You should go on happening. And that would be fine. He could use that. Typically, New Testament authors are going to reserve that for what they want you to do and go on doing. So that seems to be part of how, at least overall in the New Testament, how they're dividing it up. They're like, if this is happening negatively and it's going to go on happening, but we don't want it to happen, what we'll actively call you to do, we'll use the participle tense, and we'll reserve this for the bad people. Oversimplification, but a good starting point to understand it, and it may apply here. But that's all just grammar stuff, which gets maddening, but it helps clarify what Peter is and isn't doing, what he is and is not saying. So he is not saying that in his day, they're one day going to show up. And it's also not that people later were looking back and writing in Peter's voice and saying, they're going to show up one day, so we need to, or they're here, so we need to make it sound like he foretold this. There's actually very different reasons, and they're not difficult reasons to understand, both grammatically or ideologically. Now, the NIV says they will secretly introduce destructive heresies, and this is where Peter gets the fundamental charge against these men. They're introducing destructive heresies. That's the charge that Peter is rebuking them for, okay, by writing this letter. I want to note the NIV says secretly. The secrecy element doesn't exist there in Greek. The NIV has added this for clarity. There's no notion of espionage. So this guy in the hat and the trench coat here, not there, okay? It's merely better to translate it, who will introduce destructive heresies. There's no secrecy element. The reason that they get it is because in Jude 5, Jude seems to indicate that his heretics are slipping in secretly among the churches, infiltrating there. And in light of Jude 5, the people that have noticed that Peter is following Jude from this point on are adding an idea that is there in Jude to Peter that's not there in Peter. I don't think this is a secret. I think this is happening out in the open. Rachel?
Interestingly enough, I just checked the King James Version, and it says, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies.
Damnable heresies. Nice.
Bad. And the secret is just that they are sharing it on a one-to-one basis rather than on a pulpit. Like, privily is, I mean, that's what I would...
That's a possibility. Are they up teaching in the pulpit? The language of teachers seems to suggest that if they're teaching in the community, they're at least on some level doing it publicly.
Sure.
Privately is probably happening regardless of whether or not they're publicly teaching, I would say. I'm guessing, but I would think if they're bold enough to get up there and do it publicly, they're doing it privately. But even if they're not doing it here, they're doing it privately, and it's catching on, as we will see.
Well, and I guess it also depends on the service structure of preaching.
Could be. I would say that
More small groups.
the early church had not one preacher. They would essentially have lots of people, 3 or 4, especially in the Jewish communities, come up and share whatever message they want. It could potentially go all day.
It's a town hall meeting.
Kind of, yeah. For your local Jewish community, for sure. Yeah, like the synagogue was essentially their town hall. So my point is there's no real malicious intent in this charge as far as doing it behind the backs of the teachers of the church, behind the apostles' back. But it is a charge that they're bringing something destructive to the church, into the church, and that needs to be dealt with. So the rest of Peter's letter is trying to deal with this now that he's positively affirmed the apostles' and the prophets' teachings and orthodox Christian belief about the second coming.
So is it the people that are doing, I mean, I understand, is it the message that they're secretly telling, like letting people believe that it's true when it's not? I mean, they're heretics after all. Do you think that's a possibility? That it's not them secretly invading the congregation, it's the message they're presenting that is secret.
I guess it depends on whether they actually believe the message that they're saying.
Right, well, yeah, it goes to motive, of course.
Yeah.
I don't think the message that they're saying is secret, because wherever Peter is and is writing from, he's heard about it and is reacting to it.
Okay.
Kind of all kept secret.
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
And again,
It happens, right?
the fact that there is no secrecy language to this means that I think that they're probably a little more brash and bold about it. They really don't like the coming judgment of God. And because of that, they're going to let you know, hey, we don't like that idea of the gospel.
So here's an option.
And so why don't you just, if there's no judgment, why don't we just go do whatever we want? So, and this is where the idea is going. It's something that's a destructive heresy that leads to apostasy. And this is the problem. Peter is trying to head off the notion that by coming in and announcing bad things, that it's going to lead people astray and ultimately away from God, which is where he goes later in these verses. Let's see. Let's skip this one. He's very close to the language of Jude 4. Let me just point that out there. But as I've already mentioned, okay, Jude 4, not Jude 5. Jude describes them as secretly slipping in, but Peter's language is not really like that. But let me just back up and read this. Peter doesn't use that same language. He may be indicating that these men have not set out to cause a problem, maybe even genuinely trying to help in their own minds, but they're nonetheless in error, and they're in danger of the consequences in store for those who follow their error in thinking. And this is the point that I've already mentioned. They might not know just how wrong they are. It doesn't change the fact that they're wrong. And it just goes to show that even with people with the best of intentions can go so wrong, they end up denying their sovereign Lord who bought them. So the correct understanding of truth is necessary to avoid unintentional error because we have the capacity to self-deceive. We can deceive ourselves and we can genuinely and truly believe our own self-deceptions. I mean, that was the fundamental reality as soon as we took that fruit and ate that first fruit off the tree. We really believed we were going to gain wisdom and life. Oops, we killed everyone. And all the genuineness of the faith that you have is irrelevant depending on the accuracy of its truth and the object in which you place your faith. Placing your faith in Jesus is great because He's the best object to place your trust in for how you live your life. But you don't get to decide the tenets of the gospel. God has already laid these out. It's His gospel. Nobody gets to come along and say, I don't really like that judgment aspect. Let me give you two great theological words. Tough crap. God doesn't care about your opinion. He gives you all the freedom in the world, but if you're going to use your freedom to deceive yourself that things He said is not true and things He has not said are true, you're not free of the consequences of that. And Peter could be living within that reality of saying, look, you guys didn't set out to cause a problem, but you're causing a problem and we need to deal with it. However, he's going to go on and describe them as greedy people. So maybe they did set out to cause a problem. And we'll talk about that. I'm just saying these are different options we have to weigh and think about. Regardless, people still deal with the same things. Lots of people don't set out to cause a problem and they end up becoming one. So they're heterodox. What does heterodox mean? Look at context clues. If you know what orthodox means, you might be able to know what heterodox means.
Outside of orthodoxy?
Pretty much. It's just the ortho is what is it, a Greek or a Latin word? I forget. For one or unity. Hetero is the Greek or Latin word, I forget which, for two. So you get heterosexual as in two genders. Orthodox is the term for saying the agreed upon doctrine of the church. Single, yeah. The one agreed upon doctrine. Heterodoxy is saying the multiple options that disagree with that. So Peter's point is that their heterodox teachings are leading to social actions, which are the opposite of orthodox practices, laid out in the homily. So you've got the first 3 through 11 telling you what practices are there. These ideas are leading people down the wrong roads of life. That's the point, okay? So the real danger is that faulty theology leads to faithlessness. If you don't believe the right things, it's very hard to go down the right roads of God. So you want your thinking and ideas to be as accurate as possible so that you can live as faithfully to God as possible. It's not a one-to-one correlation. You can get the right thoughts right and still do the wrong actions. But if you get the thoughts wrong, it's going to be much, much harder to get the actions of godly living right.
So are there fundamental truths, and then is there sort of this second tier that is debatable?
Yes, I think so.
Okay,
For instance, the fundamentals, for instance, that Peter has already dealt with is that Jesus is the Messiah.
Right.
That is undeniable. He's already been anointed on the mountain for the Davidic ministry of the Messiah. He's already our God and Savior, Jesus Christ, which is mentioned in verse 1. And the heretics probably believe at least that much. But whether or not they're doubting that, they're certainly doubting the idea that the messianic authority Jesus possesses means he is not only capable of judging the world, but has to judge the world in the future. He has to set everything right, so he has to deal with all the wrong. They don't like that, so they're throwing out at least that much of the gospel. But for Peter, that's a non-negotiable.
Got it.
And at least part of this argument is what is negotiable and what is non-negotiable.
Got it.
The tenets of the gospel should be non-negotiable. And for the most part, you'll find that if you look at the ancient creeds that the church comes up with in the 3rd and 4th centuries, as they build that out over time, all Christian communities across the planet actually agree to those things. Where they start diverging, for instance, in Catholic, Greek Orthodox, and most Protestant churches, is, okay, we agree in the content of the gospel. They start disagreeing with how do you access the gospel-saving power. The Protestants, led correctly by Martin Luther, ended up getting it right by saying, look, the only thing you have to do is actually have faith in Jesus. We disagree on what that faith means and looks like and how you can express it, but that's the corner thing. The Catholics and Greek Orthodox, depending on who you ask and how they describe it, will say you have to have faith and you have to go through the churches on some level, whether that's sacramental, usually it is in the higher liturgical churches, and you know, they'll say faith plus church, and they'll mean church however they mean it. I don't disagree with the idea that you need to be connected to the body of Christ, but I don't think it's salvific dependent to be, because that can take a lot of different shapes and forms. Okay, so church and heresies are supposed to be polar opposites, but churches are caught up in heresies all the time. It should be that neither can accept the other as legitimate, but we do. We accept all sorts of ideas, and I guarantee you Baptists are no different. We haven't been around that long, 250 years, the Baptist movement, and although our definitions of baptism are usually the closest to what they were in the Jewish day, we still miss all sorts of things that we need to be corrected on. So let's not harp on all the people that get major things wrong. We get major things wrong all the time.
And is that because of biblical illiteracy?
In part, it's certainly perpetuated generation to generation because of biblical illiteracy. I would say most of it begins from a person, and usually in my position, a teacher or preacher, which is what Peter's referring to here, who has a bad way of going about learning the scriptures. You know, their approach to Scripture is probably pretty bad. I like what N.T. Wright calls it helicopter Christianity, where we like certain verses, and then we get in our helicopter, we skip other verses, and then we land in the other verses that we like. Right. I'm like, that stuff in the middle is actually pretty important, and it will change the way you read where your helicopter comes down and land. So this is why I kind of dig deeper in Sunday school into verses. Make you read and make you go through the ideas that are there, confronting ideas that are in our thinking already that we need to adjust and change. Some of them can stick around and be downplayed. Some of them need to be brought to the foreground. And other ones we just need to cut out of our thinking altogether. And that's true for all Christians everywhere. So it's no different.
It also promotes the future reading of Scripture as we read on our own, to stop and make sure that we are taking an accurate view of it.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. I hope so. I think the mature Christian has the capacity to do that. The
obligation, at least.
Yeah, the obligation. Yeah, that's well said. Two things that psychology teaches us are an act of mental maturity. One, you can delay gratification. You can put off needing an immediate reward, and you can put disciplined work into something. But two, You can hold an idea in your mind without necessarily accepting it.
Yes.
And I think that's lacking in churches, where we think, no, I immediately reject that idea, or maybe I need to consider that idea and then work it out and ask questions about it to actually do it. Okay, well, that's a little out there, Chuck. I don't know if I accept that. Cool. Can you hold it in your mind, ask questions long enough, maybe even over a course of weeks and months, until the idea is fully fleshed out, and then weigh the whole idea, not just the initial impulse you gained when you heard the idea.
And determine how important it is to your worldview.
Sure. Yeah. Where does it need to be
Right.
integrated
Right.
into all the other ideas? Can it be accepted by everyone? Does it need to be accepted by everyone? Or is it just, this is the way you're going to do things, which is fine?
Isn't that the idea of critical thinking?
I would think so. I would hope so.
Seems like a lost art some days.
And I agree. And when we get to the lost art of critical thinking, or we come across a concept we don't like, say judgment, final judgment, we start going our own way in our own direction, and it leads us away from God to the point where we potentially deny the sovereign Lord who bought them. So this is a picture, by the way, of Peter denying Jesus. And I didn't even come across it in the readings, but as I was putting the PowerPoint together over the last 2 days, I thought, wait a second, if anybody knows about denying the sovereign Lord, it's Peter. Because he had such a powerful story about doing it and then being restored from doing it. So I want to keep in mind something that is, as Peter is getting through these heretics and what's going to happen, he does have a backdoor in his thinking to say, if you guys don't listen to me now, this is going to be your result. I'm telling you now so that you can listen and not actually suffer this fate.
Because I've experienced.
He's been there. He gets it. And he changed course.
Yes.
He wants the same thing of the heretics. He's going to mention in 3:9 that God doesn't actually want anyone to perish. But the reality is, if you're just going to be a child about it and think, well, I think God's so loving, he wouldn't judge anybody. Yes, you think he's so loving that he wouldn't actually punish sin? That's not love. That's not goodness.
Right.
He doesn't let sin go unpunished. It's part of his goodness. But he also doesn't require us to face our own punishment fully.
Way out.
Yeah, he certainly doesn't require anyone or desire anyone to go through condemnatory judgment. But the reason it's going to happen is because these people just won't turn from their evil.
Well, I think the difference there is the idea of punishment in like an action that I am doing to you. I am punishing you. I am spanking my child. I'm putting them in timeout versus the natural consequences that come with sin. Like the world, he set up the world. There's A plus B equals C. A lot of these things are going to have their own natural consequences.
Yes.
And if you're trying to deny the fact that that's even going to happen, then you're just unrealistic.
Yes. And so condemnatory judgment in the sense of people going to hell is the cosmic consequences of just like, this is how God set it up.
Yeah.
If you refuse to actually acknowledge and live in this, what the Old Testament calls the fear of the Lord, you actually refuse to acknowledge that he's the highest power and that he created the world and it functions this way, you're only going to face the negative consequences beyond all of this. You're right. It just...
They signed the liability waiver, but they didn't read any of the law.
Well said. Okay, so the denying language here is the opposite of to confess. Okay? It means saying no instead of saying yes to the person who has the sovereign powers. The king, the Lord, the authority figure. Somebody else has been given all authority in heaven and earth, not you, and you tell that person no. What consequences do you think are actually going to happen? It's just language ultimately of being disobedient to a king and reaping the consequences. Good kings bless or punish subjects based on their obedience and disobedience. It's never done by their lip service that they give or don't give. It's like Jesus tells a parable about this. He says, a man told two servants to go out and work at the field, and one said, I'm not going. The other said, I'll go. And then the one that said not going changed his mind and ended up going out and working in the field. The one that said, I'll go, ended up not going and working on the field. Which do you think that master is going? Which servant do you think that master is going to bless? The one who actually did it. It's not a matter of Well, I said yes. Yeah, but you functionally said no. And that's more important. You can get up in front of the congregation and you can say, I believe in the Lord all you want. We're going to sing We Believe as our third song. You can sing those words all you want. If you don't actually live as if He is the Lord, your answer is still no. You're still denying the sovereign Lord, which may say something about the heretics because they may be, they're apostates in the sense that they're Christians, probably baptized believers in the church, but they're going wrong here theologically and now morally. And so because they're morally going wrong, they're telling the Lord no, and that's what creates an apostate. You do that long enough.
That's why everybody talking about heaven ain't going.
Heaven ain't what?
Everybody that's talking about heaven ain't going.
Oh, everybody that's talking about heaven ain't going. And then, so renunciation of the Lord is usually a refusal to obey, regardless of what you do or don't actually verbalize and say. So it's like God doesn't care so much about our words. He does care much, much more about our actions. Now, I mentioned this last week during the sermon, you want your actions and your words to be integrated. But, I mean, if you have to be like one of the servants in the parable, be the one who said no and then went and did it, and then come back and say, okay, Lord, I'm sorry I said no. I learned my lesson. And he says, I know, that's why you went out and did it. You realized that what I was telling you to do was better than what you were going to do, and you changed your actions, and I accept that. And I forgive you for telling me no. Now go out and do this. Say, yes, Lord. And then your words and actions are now integrated. But, if you're working that out, it's better to make your actions match. Okay, we're going to do one more slide, and then we're just going to stop because for today, because I need to go do some other things before the service starts. So it would seem likely that this verbal denial of the Lord, that this is a verbal denial of the Lord, considering that they are teaching that He isn't coming again. But it's clearly coupled with actions that have renounced disobedience to Jesus, the King. So the point here is to say they're denying that the Lord is coming again. If you're denying that the Lord is coming again, are you denying the Lord in the present? And I think Peter is trying to make the point of saying they are, certainly, because they don't live as if He's the present reigning King. They are not, which is why their greed is leading them down all the wrong paths. Why would you obey a king you don't believe is coming to punish disobedient subjects? You believe that you can get away with it. That's why you're doing it. It's why we always do it. And it's just not good. So next week, as we further break this down a little bit, we're going to jump into the ideas of the consequences for doing this. But this is a good place to leave it for today.